running to be the next Prime Minister of Canada is Chrystia Freeland. She's the former Deputy Prime Minister and former Minister of Finance. She joins me now. Ms. Freeland, appreciate you being with us. First of all, what do you make of this whiplash coming from the White House, the full steam ahead on tariffs and on pause, and there are more threats? Is this a coherent strategy?
Well, look, there have been more flip-flops than we can keep track of here in Canada. But what we do know is, the Prime Minister is right, the Wall Street Journal is right. These are the dumbest tariffs in history. This is utterly self-mutilating. It's really a perverse approach, Anderson, because America is hurting itself. Moving in this direction, the president is killing the U.S. stock market. Your stock market is actually performing worse than the stock market in Europe or in Canada. You're going to raise the prices on gas. You're going to raise the prices on groceries. You're going to make electricity more expensive. And all for what reason? Because Canadians aren't nice enough? I mean, come on. This is just utterly absurd. America is hurting itself. And the end result has been to do something which is really hard to do: antagonize Canadians. There is this wave of patriotism in Canada right now, the likes of which I have never seen in my life. We started off being really hurt by this because we know that we are really good friends to you, really good neighbors. We know that so much of America's prosperity has been built on the foundation of having Canada the best neighbor in the world to your north. But now I would say Canadians are getting really angry.
Well, let me, the president has, you are a candidate to be the next Prime Minister of Canada. The president has attacked you personally, calling you a, quote, whack, and claiming credit for your resignation as Finance Minister and Deputy Prime Minister. How would you approach these negotiations if you became the new head of the government? Because what the president is saying is, Canada's been ripping off American on lumber and dairy, and that this would be payback for that.
Well, Anderson, I and the vast majority of Canadians consider that name calling by the president to be juvenile, but also a compliment. And during the first negotiations we had with President Trump, there was tons of name calling. There was tons of hollering and kicking and screaming. During the negotiations themselves, his nickname for me was the Killer, which I definitely took as a compliment. And the good news is, after all, coming from him, right? But the good news is, after all of that kicking and shouting and screaming, and after the president said he was going to rip up his trade deal with us, we renegotiated it. He said the new deal that we have now was the best trade deal ever. I negotiated it. I happen to agree with him. He did impose tariffs on us. My response was dollar for dollar retaliation. And after a few months, without any concessions, he lifted those tariffs. And the reason for that, Anderson, is, the laws of economics, they're like the laws of gravity. You can do all kinds of social media posts and make up funny names. But at the end of the day, the laws of economics prevail. And the reality is, your economic relationship with us is great. It is balanced. It is mutually beneficial. It is good for the United States. It is good for Canada. And that's why, as Prime Minister, my approach would be united, strong, and smart. I'm sure there would be lots of insults. I'm sure there would be lots of name calling. And I'm also sure at the end of the day, we would get back to a win-win.
Ms. Freeland, I appreciate your time tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Joining me now is former chair of the Council of Economic Advisors under President Joe Biden, our friend Jared Bernstein. Jared, so in a new MSNBC.com article, you say that the tariffs are already taking a toll on the economy from the rising uncertainty felt by consumers and businesses. And you cite the February plunge in the Consumer Confidence Index. So what is worse? Is it the uncertainty? Is it the tariffs? And how long before Trump's it's on, it's off approach seriously hurts the economy?
Well, it's always great to be with you, and you're asking exactly the right questions. I think the answer, how long, is already upon us. So we saw the stock market down 3% this week. 1 week in the stock market isn't the biggest outcome in the world. But what it's really telling us is that investors are spooked. And investors are spooked by precisely what you just accurately called the whiplash of this back and forth. So at this point, these tariffs, whether they've been administered or proposed, are deeply unpopular with producers, the car companies themselves. The American car companies that were supposed to be helped by these tariffs were the ones that went to the White House and asked for this reprieve. Investors, as we've discussed, and consumers who uniformly view them as raising their prices.
So, look, Donald Trump himself has been a personal fan of tariffs for decades, though he has not offered clarity on why he is so hell-bent on imposing them on Canada and Mexico, which, by the way, will undo his own USMCA trade agreement that he negotiated 4.5 years ago during his first term. And again, the Wall Street Journal called it the dumbest trade war in history. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau called the move very dumb. And Canada's retaliatory tariffs, Jared, they are still going forward despite Trump's pause. So if Canada and Mexico hold firm, where does this go?
Well, where does this go with this administration is a very hard question to answer based on precisely what we've discussed already, this back and forth, these reprieves, these deadlines, all of which create a really pessimistic, I'd even say a toxic environment for American investors. One of the problems with these tariffs that the Trump team just seems to refuse to wrap their head around is that at this point, about 45% of our imports, things we buy from other countries, are actually inputs into our own manufacturing. We call them intermediate inputs. So when you put a tariff on something that a domestic producer uses to make things, that makes domestic manufacturing more expensive. That's why the car producers themselves ask for a reprieve. It's why Alcoa constantly goes to the Trump administration and says, can we have a reprieve from the aluminum tariffs that you've imposed to try to help this? You ask a very piercing question as to why they continue to pursue this when everyone from the left wing to the conservative Wall Street Journal is calling this dumb. And I think that's a fair question, but I think those assessments are correct.
So when you talk about these specifics, so this is like what some small part or something being put together. It's done in the United States. It crosses over the border to get something adjusted to it. It crosses back. I was hearing about in Maine where lobstering, that is the lifeblood of the Maine economy. Apparently, the majority of lobsters caught in Maine are sent for processing to Canada. Slap a tariff on it right there. When they come back across the border to be sold or eaten in our restaurants here in the U.S., let's put another tariff on that. What's that going to do to Maine?
It's going to do bad things to Maine producers and consumers. And look, I mean, what you're describing is something I've long described under the rubric of you can't unscramble the globalization omelet. I suppose you could if you wanted to break a lot of things, but the question is why? What you just described is a microcosm of a highly integrated North American production system, whether it's autos, food, lumber, energy. This is a highly integrated system, and it's one that I would say, to their credit, the Trump administration in their first term helped build with the USMCA, the United States, Mexican, Canada trade agreement, which they're now obviously ignoring. You could, as I've said, and as you could break this highly integrated system. You can't de-integrate it, not in a month. Maybe you could in 6 months or a year, but why? That is the question that I have not heard anything close to an answer to. Why would you want to de-integrate a system that's highly integrated, providing benefits to consumers and workers on both sides of the border? Again, this is not just me talking. The very businesses went to called the White House this week and said, don't do this.
President Donald Trump with a new threat to Canada, saying the U.S. may place reciprocal tariffs on Canada soon, floating a possible 250% tax on dairy products. While the Wall Street Journal reports the Justice Department is investigating what caused egg prices to rise. Joining me now, Congressman Jimmy Gomez, Democrat from California and a member of the Ways and Means Committee. Congressman, welcome back to the show. And you are also a member of the Dad's Caucus, and you've been pushing for action on the rising eggs, the grocery prices. What are your thoughts today as a new tax on Canadian dairy products, 250%, is looming?
Well, Well, I do a lot of the shopping in my family. I go with my wife and my son, and we see the prices going up and up and up, and our savings going down and down and down. Americans are struggling when it comes to the cost of eggs, when it comes to the cost of dairy, when it comes to the cost of bread. So these tariffs are just going to make everything worse. And unfortunately, this administration, Donald Trump, Secretary Bessent, they really don't care that it's going to hurt American people, that the working class is going to hurt. I call this the let them eat cake administration, because it's made up of billionaires that are out of touch with the struggles of everyday Americans.
Okay, that's of course reflecting the French Revolution language. So can a DOJ investigation help reduce egg prices? And how much more can the Trump administration do if bird flu is mostly to blame?
Well, one of the things that they can start doing is really hiring back the people that were studying the bird flu, trying to develop a strategy to deal with it. And then at the same time, digging into that issue. The DOJ, fine, go ahead, investigate. But I think that's just a red herring, no pun intended, that they're trying to distract the American people, that they're actually not doing anything about egg prices. Since he got in office, egg prices have increased 33%, 33%, and it's only getting worse. And remember, he said on day one, he would lower costs for everyone, especially on groceries.
Yeah. Also new to discuss this week, the Doge drama, a clash in the Oval Office over Elon Musk's unilateral cuts. And NBC's Gabe Gutierrez posed a direct question.
See, Canada has cracked the Trump code. I gotta be honest, I'm not trying to be mean. Cracked the Trump code better than the Democrats have. Canadians, conservatives included to some degree, like Doug Ford, they've cracked the code better than American domestic opponents of Trump. They've been more effective at turning Trump's people against him. By which I mean, you don't defeat Trump, at least in the short term, by mobilizing people that already dislike Trump. Because they already hate Trump, rightfully so. You're not a fan of him, I'm not a fan of him. Like, nobody who watches my stuff regularly is a fan of him. But how you get to Trump is to go at his people. And you go at his people by exposing the effects the tariffs are going to have, not on poor Americans, even the poor people that voted for him to some degree, but on American capitalists, big business people, the people that cut checks to Trump and to other top Republicans, the people who are very important in local and state level Republican politics. And so that's what Canada's doing. When they go after Trump's tariffs, they say, well, if you're going to raise prices on Canadian dairy, that's going to hurt a lot of businesses in the United States, right? If you go after our auto industry, that's going to hurt the people that sell cars in the United States. You are causing this. Wall Street is freaking out. The thing Trump cares about most, the life of the other rich and wealthy people. He doesn't give a damn if you starve on the street. He doesn't care. But if a rich person loses 1% of their income because of his tariffs, he is going to flip out. And Canada is exposing that weakness.